When I look at our history, I realize that our history is not negotiable. It's not defined by slavery. It is a profound history, and we need to teach it in honesty. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening, good evening, good evening. Welcome to the Erudition Network. My name is Eddie Phillips. This is the Erudition Network Interactive Black History and Knowledge session. And I welcome you tonight for joining us as we kind of get ready to go into some pretty relevant topics tonight that we'll touch on the history for, but as always, but at the same time, try to make a connection to where we are right now. If you are new to this program, which I noticed that we had a lot of people watching or viewing some of the episodes last week. So if you're new, I welcome you. This is interactive. So I ask that you ask questions. You bring questions to what it is that we're talking about, rather we be live or rather you watching it as a replay. Please drop questions in the chat or in the comments, and I will answer you. We have some from last week that I'm getting ready to answer tonight also. So we may see if that kicks off another idea for another show. What is interesting to you all? What is something that you want to talk about historically? Or just in generally, and that we can get on this show and talk about factually. Erudition Network is dedicated to providing you information, but also in making sure that what we cover is factual and can be looked at and researched on your own and grow your own understanding and knowledge. So I welcome you, all you who are maybe new to watching the program, and I thank all of you who have been with us for the last 3 going on 4 years as we have ventured to provide information and knowledge to everyone. Tonight, I want to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, here's the thing. I don't want to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion from a political standpoint, and I don't want to talk about it in a way where it makes you feel ostracized. No, I want to talk about it in earnest, have an earnest discussion of it and talk about it historically, why it was needed, what has happened in our country that has made this something that is talked about so venomously right now, but understanding why it's a necessity, or it has become a necessity, and understanding that this is a cultural thing and not a color thing, because too often we associate DEI with black and brown. When we say DEI, we jump to this conclusion that DEI only applies to people of brown and black skin, and that it is somehow designed to make those people more successful than those who are white. Well, all of that is a lie. All of that has no foundation in history. It has no foundation in fact. And so I want to talk about that, and I want us to kind of go into it earnestly and honestly, without everyone feeling that this is something political or something where you have to draw your line in the sand. No, I want you to open up your aperture. I want you to be open to the fact of learning more and understanding more, because if we can do that, then we can clear up all of the confusion that has been put out here about what DEI is and why it has become such a foundational concept, right, in America. See who's with us tonight. I see us. I'm starting to see some comments. Sean Anthony, thank you for joining us. I appreciate you being here. Let me see. Broken traditions. DEI is more than just skin color. It is also ageism, sexual orientation, gender identity, etc. Absolutely. There are, as we will uncover tonight and go into tonight, we will talk about the fact that it is not a color thing, which is why this episode's title is America's DEI, a crisis of culture, not color. Right? Great point to make. Broken traditions. Great point. So why DEI? What led us to having to establish DEI? Last week, I talked about how the African slaves, the freed slaves, how they were in slavery and in freedom, essential into how American citizenship is defined. The same goes with DEI. If you don't know what DEI is, it's diversity, equity, and inclusion. It is also related to equal opportunity. And it is to provide a social and legal and institutional chance for people to be able to be treated equally under the law. This is my first time, Broken Tradition. You said this is my first time coming across your channel, new subscribers here. Oh, thank you. I'm glad that you're here. Thank you for subscribing. We fall into this lie, and I think it is because a lot of times what we see is the press and everything telling us what we should think DEI is. Today, there's things talking about with the tragedy, and I want to take a moment and say my prayers go out to the families who lost family members of the people who lost their lives in that tragic crash, a collision in DC, and how now the media is putting it out here because politicians, even the president, are ascribing it to DEI. And most people can't even define what it is and why it is. Equal opportunity does not mean that we go get someone who is not qualified. That is the lie. DEI does not mean unqualified. It means that a person that is qualified, but historically, socially, legally, institutionally, right, has not been given the opportunity nor the chance to participate in a certain opportunity, job, and it cannot be included. And this came across in the 19th and 20th centuries because of slavery. Because of slavery. The abolition of slavery and going through the Reconstruction era, right? We established what is the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. Those amendments are very important because those are the amendments that established and abolished slavery and granted citizenship and voting rights, right, to Black Americans. The thing is, the later interpretations of those amendments allowed people in this country after Reconstruction to go and implement Black codes, Jim Crow, and those things restricted rights. Even though you were free, even though you had the right to due process, even though you had the right to vote, those laws, those restrictions were put in to limit. And so in the early days of the 1900s, when we had groups such as the NAACP and others, they began to advocate for equal treatment per the Constitution across the country. Blacks led the way in that, in the idea that people were being lynched, people were being killed, people were being slaughtered to deny them their rights, to stop them from being able to be full citizens in the United States. And so we can't just say that DEI is a color thing, but what we can, or about color, but we can establish that Black Americans, those former slaves, were pivotal in what happened and what was provided for equality and inclusion. It is not about not being qualified. It is not about not being someone who can do the job. It's about being treated fairly. Get back to you guys' comments. Some try to say DEI attacks masculinity, but I don't think it does. It's not a masculinity versus femininity issue. It is a validation thing. It is not a versus validation thing either. Okay, Tina. Dad, good to see you. Just made. No, you didn't miss much. I'm glad that you're here. Glad you said you didn't miss much at all. Glad that you're here, Dad. Sean Anthony, you said, yes, DEI, does it mean that you don't have to learn? In fact, it means that you have to learn even more, but you still won't be hired due to either disability or lack of knowledge. Now, I've done shows, great point, Sean Anthony. I've done shows on what they call the uneducables, right? I've done shows on what people termed minorities across the board as, and said that they weren't qualified for jobs. These all fall into those restrictions that were placed upon people during these early phases, right? But the thing is, what I want you to know tonight, if you take nothing else from this lesson tonight, is that it is not that you are not qualified. It is a segregated mentality that pushed the need for DEI because there was an inequality, right? And we needed to address that. Now, probably the most famous ways of addressing it is when we look into the history of civil rights, right? Most people will look at the things that happened because coming out of Reconstruction, coming out of the early 1900s, coming out of World War I, World War II, because history in our country is a lot based on following the wars. We teach our kids to follow wars, and that jumps them through their history understanding. So if we took that same approach tonight, let's look at what happened in the early 1900s and the early 1913 and 15. In those days were World War I, coming out of World War I, after Reconstruction, more rights denied to people who went and fought for their country. People attacked, told they couldn't live in certain places, told they couldn't use benefits that were given to other soldiers, sailors, whatever. They could not use those same benefits. People being lynched, people being blinded, properties taken, Blacks running from the South to go to the North because of the restrictions that were being pushed upon them. I told a friend today that there are Black people who are living in poverty to this day in families who own land, legally own land. There are documents that show that their family owned parts of land in the South that may now have apartments, schools, communities on them that their family has the paperwork to show that they own that was taken from them as they were ran out of town. There was no fairness. And so as we get into the mid 20th century, as we get into the civil rights movement, as we get into the 1950s and 1960s, there was a need for reform. There was a desire coming out of World War II. Blacks had fought in every war, every situation. And the Constitution had told them that they would be given rights. What is more alarming, let me go back a little bit. If we go look even at the suffragist movement, when women were advocating for the vote, and I've told you all many times about the suffragists, the people like Alice Paul, who didn't want Ida B. Wells and other Black women. They wanted their monies that they were raising for the suffragist movement. But what they did not want them to do was be a part of their marches, be a part of their discussions. They wanted them to be included, but off to the side. These same people, who some of them had been abolitionists, who then turned their backs on Blacks when Black men were given the vote. The Elizabeth Cady Statons, the Susan B. Anthonys that we talk about, who pushed blacks off to the side. And even when women were eventually given the vote, those same white women did not stand with black women to ensure that their vote was respected. Those same white women went along with the racist Jim Crow mentalities that had propped up in the country, and they allowed blacks as a whole, male and female, to be suppressed and not be able to vote. Once they had gotten what they wanted, they were no longer an ally. So, though it is not a color thing, it is cultural. And that, as Tina said earlier, it is not about masculinity or femininity. It's not about anything. It's masked in this idea, these lies that we tell. But at the end of it, in the heart of it, it's an ism, rather it be ageism, racism, sexism. It is something that has been pushed upon America from its inception. And when we brought in DEI, it was the idea of changing that. And no one benefited from that more than white women. White women benefited from the constitutional amendments. It allowed them to be full citizens. It allowed them to then say, I don't need a man to own a property, because that was the way of the world before those civil rights amendments. And even when DEI or equal opportunity became a big push, white women were the ones who were allowed to go into the workforce. They were the ones who were allowed to take jobs, and they took those jobs, even over more qualified minorities. Because DEI, as we have established, was not about color. It was about a broad stream of people who had been ostracized from being able to benefit socially, legally, and institutionally. It gave them the rights that they had been denied. And then many of them, not all, because we're not preaching racism here, but many of them, and we know this historically from looking at the facts and looking at the laws, turned their backs and went along with their privilege and the status quo of the country and allowed this to happen. There was a time that the Irish and the Italians were not considered full citizens until it became beneficial to have them on as voters. And so they became a very strong voting bloc, and they made them their way in to be deemed included in what we now call white America. And those same Italians and Irish and other immigrants that were living in poverty in New York and Chicago, in these areas, they moved out after World War II. Mayor Theodore LaGuardia of New York and Franklin Delano Roosevelt sat down and came up with redlining in New York before the end of World War II. This is a fact. This is documented fact. And they allowed people to be a part of community, except some of us who they still deemed not necessarily needed or wanted. There's a reason why Franklin Delano Roosevelt, I bring him up, when he suffered from polio and lost his ability to walk. For the early parts of his administrations, he tried to hide it because he didn't believe that people would vote for anybody that was lame. There's a reason why he established his resort to help people with polio, of all the whites with polio. There's a reason why laws during his administration were starting to be written to allow people with disabilities to be able to work. We're talking about the 40s and the 50s here, while at the same time still discriminating against blacks. Latinos, and Indians. Let's add that additionally too. The civil rights movement started to change a lot of these things. And it gave us the ability to start to challenge. One of the most primary cases, right, that we should all know is Brown versus the Board of Education, 1954. The Supreme Court had to be challenged on the separate but equal. That's what it was about. Separate but equal. But it wasn't equal. Thurgood Marshall and lawyers argued the fact, right, that the separate but equal doctrine was unconstitutional. And that even if it were separate, it definitely wasn't equal. Black schools and minority schools did not have new books, did not have great facilities. How was that equal? And once it was allowed to say that the separate but equal doctrine was unconstitutional, that is what led us to integration. The same people now who are arguing about the fact that education should not have Black studies, should not have cultural studies, right? They didn't even want you with their schools. And the inequality that came from segregation was supposed to be eradicated when we integrated the schools. Let's put a pin in that and see what you guys are saying. Most people don't, Sean Anthony, most people don't like to hire people who are disabled, have previous injuries, lawsuits against their past employer, raised in bad neighborhoods, criminal history, et cetera, et cetera. Otherwise, until they fought for equal opportunity, that still doesn't fully extend to all people. That is true. Tina, the DEI is misunderstood like it's validation of knowledge, skills, and ability, but it's not. DEI is inclusive of those who are systematically excluded, but the prospective person must be qualified. That qualification mark here is important. We were talking about Brown versus the Board of Education, and I like to use Thurgood Marshall as an example. Thurgood Marshall was a great lawyer. He became a great judge. He became a great Supreme Court justice. And he believed in following the law. When Dr. King, them had civil disobedience, and even before Dr. King, really, Thurgood Marshall was the one that traveled all over to defend Black people by constitutional law. In some places, he was called Mr. Civil Rights. He was called the man who you would call when things got really bad to argue a case. He was skilled. And when going to the Supreme Court, or even when he talked about it, he still had to be qualified. And to be qualified in a place where they are saying that the schools are lesser, where they know things aren't necessarily being given fairly, meant what I think someone said earlier, I believe it was Sean Anthony said, they had to work harder. They had to study harder. They had to understand what some people just push off to the side as it's not as important to me because I'm going to get it anyway. A country that allowed veterans to come back after World War II and use their military benefits and buy homes in the suburbs, but told Blacks to stay in the ghettos or buy homes in the city that were that were dilapidated or not really of quality, while they moved all of these other people out and gave them government assistance so that they could buy their homes faster. They could use that acquired wealth to get cars, open up businesses, and create wealth. This was denied from minority communities such as Black and Latino. This was denied. And so even when we integrated the schools with the passing of Brown versus the Board of Education, it really wasn't until the Civil Rights Act of 1964 that we really start to see legislation that is targeted and pivotal to making sure that people are treated fairly across the board, rather by race, ethnicity, gender, whatever, right? Ability, those things could not be discriminated against. It helped to provide legal protection. This is why when these things are signed away in executive orders, they are important. These were legal recourses and legal things that were established to allow people to have more equitable lives. And it was something that lawmakers thought would be the start to tearing apart all of this systemic racism and discrimination and violence that had plagued the country since the time of Reconstruction. It was marched for, bled for. People died just to get that Civil Rights Act of 1964. And here we are today telling ourselves that DEI is something bad, something that means people aren't qualified. You know, before affirmative action, it was cheaper to go to schools. Before integration, things were separate and people were still succeeding. We had our doctors, our lawyers, we had our shops. But here's the problem. As I've told you all many times in going over through all our history, whenever Blacks did better, someone got jealous. If you don't believe that as a fact, go pull up my episodes on lynchings, on sundown towns, on how people were terrorized for years. And people could come in and take what they wanted. Burn your farm, your house, your property down. Kill your loved one. Run you out of town and then just take your property or take your possession. And because a lot of Blacks were not educated in these fine to dine schools, because they were only getting the education that they had to go seek and fight and delve for, they wanted to push an idea of, we want to go to schools like Harvard, Yale, Michigan. When the University of Michigan implemented the affirmative action program, they wanted to increase minority enrollment because they understood that minorities brought something to the table. It wasn't just out of the goodness of their heart. It was the idea that minorities were creating things, and people felt, wait a minute, if given more education, what could they bring to the country? This is a fact. I give you an example. Henry Ford would make a trip to Tuskegee University every year. Henry Ford would go there to go visit during the life of George Washington Carver. He would spend a day with George Washington Carver. He would pick his brain. He wanted to know what made this genius work. That's just one example. Throughout Black history, we have Black folks who took a little bit of training and did something amazing, extraordinary, Latinos. I hate to say black, but people of color. Let's say that. The diversity, equity, and inclusion benefited this country. It was not an issue to utilize the minds and bodies of people of color during slavery. That was never an issue because that was free labor. That was being able to pick the mind of people. I told you guys in other episodes when they yanked our folks from Africa, they didn't take dummies. If you read my book, go get my book, 101 Black History Challenge, Question Challenge, you'll notice that I start talking about the different cultures who had already learned to bend metal, different cultures who had advanced science in ways that the European had. And these were their descendants. They knew how to bend metal to be good blacksmiths. They knew how to plant crops, how to make them successful. They knew all of these things. And they brought those things to America with them. All right, what are you guys saying here? All living, okay, American of color. All living, you say, all living humans descend in an unbroken line purely through their mothers and through the mothers of their mothers, back until lines converge on one woman. Yes, the mitochondrial Eve, okay? We became a species ranged from the darkest brown to the lightest beige at everything in between, shades of brown and an array of yellowish and reddish, okay? I wonder what happens to Americans who pass white when they stop passing as white, separations from the rest of the human race. Okay? Slave traders, military order of Christ commission. All of these things that you're saying are absolutely positively true, American of color. I will not take from that. But I will add this. This title of this episode is that it's not color. It has never been about color. It's never been about color. If you read my book, okay, now she plug, go get my book. It's on Amazon. Go get it. You will notice, in rather you get the interactive version or rather you get the print version of the book. There's over 200 and actually about 300 something references, citations in this book. But one of the things that I wanted to point out, you talked about mitochondrial DNA, right? And that is absolutely true. But when our science is also being unfair, unclear, right? When we lie about the mitochondrial information, when we lie about what aligns us as human beings to be related to each other, it has to be an acceptance. And for the most part, they have never accepted that. They've never accepted that. So though you may talk about mitochondrials, right? You may talk about the phenotypic variations that happen in human beings, right? What dictates our eyes, our colors, and all these other things that are environmental, right? That are biological. All of those things. It still has to be accepted that we are the same. And when we talk about DEI, that is what is not accepted. There is no acceptance that people could have equal knowledge until it is beneficial, and it has been beneficial for businesses. It is a reason why JP Morgan, one of the biggest banks in the world, for the better part of almost 2 centuries now, there's a reason why JP Morgan said, no, we're not going to change our policies. The same JP Morgan bank that put insurance policies out for slave owners back during slavery. The same JP Morgan Chase that made sure that they stayed open during the Great Depression. They understand that the poor, the minority, and whatever are essential to their business. And that the outreach of such opens their business worldwide. We have to really start to embrace this and understand too that this whole thing of not being about color is not something that everybody accepts. It is not something everybody accepts. We have put law after law after law. We have the ADA. We have equal opportunity. We have affirmative action. We've had all of these things that have come to place. But yet, you're seeing today, people are just signing it away. They're signing it away. And though American of color, I hear exactly what you're saying. His mother could be, right? His mother is a descendant of mitochondria Eve. It doesn't matter to them. You're talking about people who still accept the idea that the black man is closer to the animal than they are. The fact is, that's the point. Science is factual. It looks at the facts, but we got to educate them. And then after the education, they got to be willing to accept it. They got to be willing to accept it. When I wrote that book, I wrote it to talk about the early world. And I dedicated the very first part of it to talking about Darwinism and talking about the lies and the mistruths and the things that have been put to us that are not true, that have been accepted and aligned to factual science in order to push us into another direction. Books that were written in the early 1900s that said that we were not human. Charles Carroll, The Negro, A Beast or an Image of God, is an example. Cannibals All is another book, an example. And you can find all these books around that time period that try to establish that. Books that are still being printed today. So when we tell people that people with disabilities in the American Disabilities Act should be respected, when we tell people that workplace diversity should be something that should happen because it strengthens the company and it allows them to have different perspectives for different communities that they're going to interact with, whether it be local or whether it be international. Some of the biggest companies in the world, whether it be Apple, IBM, all of them had these efforts because they knew. And even Elon Musk recently said, we have to bring in those diverse people because they know things we don't. They provide, they contribute to the greater whole. When we don't have diversity, equity, and inclusion, we have situations that get bad. We have elder abuse. We have euthanasia of people with disabilities. We have exclusionary practices of people where we judge them to be not able. And we have an ableist mentality against those who are disabled. When we don't have these things, we play this idea of, are they competent? Are they competent? How foolish is that? How foolish is that? And it always seems to be, right? It always seems to be that the folks who really catch hell with it are folks who are of color and disabled, or fall into one or two of the ists that they have. They didn't say all of these horrible things about Stephen Hawking. They're still quoting him on his theories of black holes and everything else. If you read about Einstein, and they say that Einstein wasn't considered to be very intelligent as a young man because he didn't speak for a very large part of his life, early life, childhood. No, it always comes down to how I feel about somebody's cultural issues, their color, the minority. The other thing that lies under it also is that DEI policies have been used to try to equalize the economic growth over the last 50 years. Since the end of the civil rights movement, DEI policies have tried to reduce racial disparities, tried to allow communities to have equal ability to receive care at hospitals, be able to have social harmony in their communities. We could all live in the same neighborhood. We could all go to the same schools, and thus give us the equal chance to all make money, all be able to take care of our families, and to be prosperous human beings. But you hear people talking about meritocracy, right? Merit. We need to push it on merit. It is merit. When African American women are the most educated people in the country, by any study you throw out here, but they are also the ones denied the most jobs, even though they're qualified, knowledgeable. And yet we fall into this trap, into this lie. And it needs to stop. What did you say here? December 7th, 2022, a Manhattan jury has found 2 Trump organizations, luxury estate portfolio, golf clubs, fine hotels, companies guilty on multiple charges of criminal tax, fraud, and falsifying business. That is true. We all know that the current president has a dubious past, at least, to say the least. We all know those things. But here's the thing, though. Here's the thing. Beyond him, because it takes more than him to stop DEI. It takes a support system out here of people who don't know what DEI was for, or let me say this, some who pretend that they don't know what it was for, some who pretend that it has not benefited their business, some who pretend that it indicates that someone has less knowledge, when in fact that's not the case. It has been proven that if you have an institution that reflects a diverse people, right, that has a diversity in it, you are more than likely to be more understanding into what is going on across the board. Across the board. Not be separatist in your mentality. Well, I'm a predominantly Latino business. I'm a predominantly Black business. I'm a predominantly white business. And I don't understand where they're coming from. Because there are minute discussions and minute interactions and relationships and people who know each other, people who talk to each other outside of work, who get together and start to see themselves as a people, as you were saying earlier, American of color. And not necessarily something different. Black Utopia. Sean Anthony, he was asked the question, are you sure it's never been about color? I benefited from affirmative action in the 80s when it was just for Black people. They didn't want AA to last for more than 8 years. So here's a great point. It was never supposed to be about color. It was never supposed to be about color. It was supposed to prohibit discrimination. It was supposed to stop the idea of being able to mandate someone's ability to do a job or to be in a place That's what it was supposed to be for. It was supposed to be to allow you to go to a school. And it also was designed to get the knowledge out of these inner city geniuses. There were studies that were found that showed that you brought something different to the table than others were. It was not a parallax view. You saw the full spectrum of, wow, affirmative action allowed people to be diverse and talk in an educated environment, in classrooms, and encourage a different way of critical thinking about a subject and to grow mutual understanding about a subject. If you want to read a case on it, go read Grutter versus Bollinger of 2003. That case showcased that diversity is a big thing in growing the knowledge in education. But those aren't the cases that are quoted. Those aren't the things that we look at. We're being taught something different. And that is where the problem arises. I see all of that you're saying about racism, but I also would say that as I started this, it's not always just about that color. It's a denial of culture, because there are women who are going to be harmed from the removal of DEI, who are not just of people of color. I attended 2 Pac-10 schools. I had the grades to get into the first one I attended, but they were looking for me. They had a spot for me. Not anymore. Exactly. They were looking for you. They were looking for what you could bring, whether it be that you got there through academics, whether you get there through sport, whether you get there through whatever. They were actively looking to bring you in to grow. There are so many things that DEI brings to the table, and so many people who don't even know what it means, right? Who are telling you that it's something bad. It's something bad. I'm going to list tonight, after this episode, some things that will definitely help us to have a better understanding, cases and things that people don't even talk about. Right? I remember reading about the PepsiCo cases and how Pepsi understood that diversity mattered to them as they were hiring more and more minorities into their factories. And that because they did that, their employment engagement that they had better business performance. People were comfortable coming to their factories and working these long hours. People were comfortable being in environments that they felt protected in. Let me see what you're saying here. You said all humans are African. Yep, we've established that. What if we could make these conversations about our African ancestry and origin easier and more meaningful? Do you think white identity racists passing free of the blemish of human skin color for money and other benefits and advantages are into it? No, here's the thing. We're not where we were, I'd say, even at the beginning of in the 50 years of my life. We are a knowledge-based world. We have the ability to pull up things and go back and look at ancient texts. We have the ability to touch libraries that are overseas at the tips of our fingertips. But is the desire there? Is the inspiration there? And that's why we do this program. To inspire you to ask those questions, to have you to go share this with your white friends, black friends, whoever, and ask these questions so that we could all grow. Tina said, major problems with understanding is the urgency to make the discussion one-sided as to neglect the holistic nature of the situation. Like, people do not have the ability to understand the complexities. I don't believe that people don't fully understand. I believe that there may be some, but many do. They understand. There have been reports, studies. Go read Why Diversity Matters, right? Go read that book. And it tells you very clearly why it matters. It gives you studies. It gives you matrices. It tells you why. Book after book, study after study, for decades. But at the heart of it, people are afraid of equality. Remember, I said this before during Dr. King's birthday, one of our broadcasts. Dr. King wrote in his last book, and he said it. He said, just because you may not have the desire as racism to kill me does not mean that you want me to do well. In other words, there are people who don't want it equal across the board because they don't want that competition. So if I say that everybody who was employed through this DEI, affirmative action, whatever it may be, whatever I term it to be, I'm using that as the code word to say they're not qualified. But I dare tell you that many of you all have worked jobs with someone who was in a position of management or authority that did not know what they were doing. And that you did a lot more of the work than they did. And they leaned on your knowledge, your understanding, your abilities to be able to survive while you were considered to be the DEI hire, the black or brown person in the office, but you knew every aspect of the office. I watched a woman in a doctor's office one time. The doctor came out and asked the lady about a patient's record. And the woman, who looked like she was temping, she's like, okay, it's here. And the doctor was like, okay, this doesn't have what I need. And she knew exactly where to go. And there was a woman there who obviously she was getting a little bit, upset, was her supervisor. Was like, well, why don't I know where that's at? Because you don't want to know where that's at. You're surviving. We need DEI. We need to understand it. We need to get people to understand why it's necessary, what its history has been, the cases and the challenges. And I'm going to give that to you. I'm going to start putting those things into some of the comments, even after this episode. We're going to talk about the Workforce 2000 report that came out in 1987. We're going to talk about the the Regents of University of California versus Bach of 1978, and on and on. I already told you about Grutter and Bollinger of 2003. We're going to put those things in here so you know that there are cases, studies, challenges, all of these things that have been utilized to validate how we all benefit from a holistic approach, an equal approach to knowledge, study, and opportunity. And if we take just that from it, and you take this episode and you share that with someone who tells you, well, I equal DEI, man, it never was right to me. Watched a video of a man that said that DEI is why we have Black History Month, which is coming up, and how it doesn't affect him. He said, I'm Italian. You may have seen the video too. I'm Italian. Why should I be forced to learn about African Americans or Black people in this country? But yet our children every day go to school and they learn about the King of England, the Queens. They learn about Germany. They learn about Italy. They learn about all of these things, the Renaissance. They learn about Columbus. They learn about the Age of Exploration. They learn about all of these things, but they don't really learn about African history because that's kind of excluded until we show people in chains. And that's what they know. Now, if I took the same mentality as that man who said, why does it matter to me? You have to learn. You have to open up your aperture, as I say, open it. See more. See how your cultures interact with each other. See how these things play a part into who we are. Because if you can do that, if you can grow that, we will be a better people. I would tell that man, I would go back into it and let him know how Hugo Sanitaria took the math from the Black Africans and took it to Spain. I would tell him how that was accepted and became alchemy, and that those people who were studying it had to hide from the Roman Church. And then how it was later passed into other parts of Europe and into England as geomancy. And that's what the kings and people use to determine where they built their castles, determine their fates, all of these things that they used and they called geomancy. And how then a German mathematician took that system that had been taken from Africa generations before, put ones and zeros on it, and called it binary. And then later on, how George Boole went and furthered it, took those ones and zeros, created Boolean algebra, and then how John von Neumann then took it and added that Boolean algebra to create the digital computer and the very edifice of what I'm talking to you on right now. All based on information that was taken from other cultures. But it all comes, as I see American of color keep saying, it comes from Africa. It came from Africa. It was stolen, parts of it, not all of it. But enough of it so that we can now have cell phones, computers, and the ability to communicate across long and vast distances. But it all comes because people took that, and whether it was nefarious or not, they shared it. They shared it. They diversified it. We can be better, but we need to understand how we all play into it. Ladies and gentlemen, I tried to get through. You guys had a lot of here tonight. I appreciate you being here, adding some things. If there's a question that I miss, I will definitely guarantee you that I will read upon it and answer it even after the show. Tina says it is applicable across the board because when you justify it to one, you have set the precedent for applying it to others and inevitably to all. American of color is a sad sign of more intellectual decline than American people. Well, at the end of the day, it takes more than though I may agree with a lot of what you've said here. It also takes more than him. And what we want to do is try to reach others so that we can stop this way of thinking. Stop this way of thinking. Black Utopia, I think I missed something that you said. Yep, I was undergrad and the Rice refused to study ethnic history, not even as a yes. Because a lot of times people teach us that history is not important. Talked about that on many different episodes too. If you are new, hey, go back, watch some of our older episodes, find something. I know people are asking questions of, well, you should cover this and that. Many things I have covered. We have over 400 something episodes. So there are a lot of episodes that have been done. So please feel free to ask those questions, and I will do my best to direct you into a place where you can better, get the information that you want. Or if we got to retouch on it and do another show on it, we can do those things too. All right. I'm going to get ready to get out of here. Again, I thank all of you. I appreciate your time. I appreciate you joining us. I forgot to put my banner up here, and I know I don't always do that, so I'm going to try to put that up here for a second. Hopefully it's long enough. If you want to help with the Erudition Network, we are always open to anything and everything that you may provide. We do have a Cash App. It's at $ the Erudition Network. Those things that are provided helps us to buy our cameras, our lights, and different things that we use to keep this program growing and to try to grow it even more so it is appreciated. If not, please do us the minimal and just share the program. Get others to join us on Mondays when Tina is on for Adroit Living. She's on at 7 o'clock on Mondays, 7 o'clock Mountain Time, 8 o'clock Central Standard Time, and I'm on at 5 on Thursday. So always know you can always drop a line on our Facebook page. Go to the Erudition Network. You can go to our website at the Erudition Network. You can do all of those things and get more and more information that you may be seeking. But until next week, I want to say thank you all again. And please have a great rest of your week. And that you hope you and your family stay safe and stay blessed. Thank you all. Be blessed.